Welcome back to Tech Paired, podcast where we explore people, careers and technology shaping the future of work. Today's guest is Gerry Thomas, an IT leader whose career journey proves it's never too late to reinvent yourself. After spending 15 years in retail management, Gerry returned to education, trained in technology and built a career that would eventually see him leading enterprise scale technology strategy, managing large teams and supporting over 20,000 users globally. Welcome to the show, Gerry.
Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So part one is around the human story. Can you take us back to the beginning and what made you decide to leave retail and pursue a career in technology?
Yeah, it seems like a distant memory now, but when I think about the term of how long, it was only sort of 15 years ago. So I'd been in retail I just started filling shelves on night shift basically, sort of 15 years before that. And even before that, I was a contractor doing security in supermarkets. Any job will do at the time, sort of there's not a lot out there. I'll go and get a role, right? Okay, I'm standing about a liquor aisle all day. But got to know the people within those Safeways at the time, now Morrison's, and the opportunity to come up to go and fill shelves on night shift, basically, which night shift made it more financially viable, certainly, with having a shift allowance, etc. But started my retail journey there, shall we say. And it taught me a lot of basics. I'd trained as a chef when I left school for me, and I'd worked for that for many years. I'd bounced around some security jobs, and I had a bit of uncertainty about the way I felt my career path going forward. Retail certainly developed that from my sort of skill set. It taught me some great customer service skills, obviously working in that retail environment. Operational discipline. We were on night shift. There was no holds barred on night shift. It was old school. You either got a shift in or you didn't come in. It was very much, it was drummed into you, the sort of operational side, because they had a certain time to get the store ready for the morning, etc. People management, I moved into that space as I progressed within the retail environment. And that in turn brought some leadership skill sets to me. And commercial awareness, what sales meant, what waste meant, and all that sort of stuff. So I've done that for a year night shift, went on to day shift, just customer service assistant. Opportunities came up to move towards team lead in this sort of small department. I took that opportunity as it came along. That further enhanced my leadership and operational discipline and various aspects like that. And ultimately, I ended up taking over the manager's role in that. There's probably 5 or 6 years in at this point. I'd learned the discipline and learned the various aspects. And then the opportunity came to move to a different retailer. I moved over to Tesco's, and they focused more on, you had a department, but you also had the store to run. So you were duty manager with that. That brought a sort of wider aspect of the operation, not just your own department. Your own department almost had to run better in your absence because you were running the rest of the store. So I went over there for 5 years and then sort of worked my way through to deputy manager with them. And that kind of got to the point, I had 3 young kids in the house, and I thought, I've been doing computers as a hobby more than anything else. I've been fixing friends and families' laptops, if anything, but I had no confidence, no knowledge, just basic self-taught skills from trial and error, if you like. And at the time, my wife was just finishing uni course and going off into her career progression, gave me the opportunity to step back from the management retail. I carried on working, filling the shelves and sort of customer service assistant, full-time then part-time as I progressed. But I then went and opened the opportunity of going to college and university, which was an eye-opener, shall we say, as a mature student. So yeah, that was my sort of initial 15 years to get me the mindset for work ethic, if you like. And certainly it done me great. And even later in my career, as I moved into sort of regional workplace management, where I'm having to work with stakeholders and senior leaders in the business, the customer service skill set kind of comes through to that, understanding the empathy and the listening and all the communication skills. So I never ever fell away, I never regretted. When I was at school, computers were like BBC Micro, sort of smaller class that people would put in if they weren't doing well elsewhere, shall we say. We never really had the ICT or the information technology or them sort of large areas, programming and all that sort of stuff. So it kind of gave me the opportunity to go into something I had a bit of a passion for. And then work didn't really become work as such. It wasn't the mundane routine of heading out every day. I actually enjoyed it with a passion. I would be sat and as some would say, not a great thing for people managing your time sort of thing, but you would be sat in the evening catching up on stuff and various other things. So,
So looking back now, Gerry, what skills from your retail career turned out to be the most valuable in technology leadership?
the team management side, the leadership, the operational discipline, understanding the business, especially the technical. We talk about budgets and we talk about what not just wasting money within the business, adoption for the business, making sure they adopt the technology that we're implementing. It's not just a case of the tool set sounds great, let's get it in. Having to work with the business when they come with a shopping list because a salesman sold them the pitch. Having that ability to then say, what is it you're trying to do? Ultimately, what's your end game? Let us work for a solution. We might have a solution already in-house, but we'll do that for you. I think the people management side, I've built teams over the last sort of 13, 14 years. Important to me is having the succession plan in place, having the individuals, the technical people that have managed technical teams. We kind of used to set them goals of annually. This is our strategic goal as a company or as a department in the organization. This is my team, and maybe I've got 23 people. This is what I want the team to achieve as a goal. But the important one for me, and I used to work my team leads on it, was what's that individual's goal? What are they looking for 3 to 5 years? And they want to stay technical? Do they perhaps want to move into team leadership? And it's really, that was the most important goal because that develops the individual. And you would open up doors then to say, actually, technology is changing in this area. We've got somebody there. I'll give an example of unified comms in one of the organisations I work for, very much moving into Teams environment, managed service, less unified comms programming or on-prem servers or anything like that to configure. And we took the opportunity with these 2 or 3 guys we had to actually move into the Microsoft Fabric and Power Platform space. Because as technical people, they were wanting to develop, it was something more interesting for them. And it was of a benefit to us because that's where we were progressing on our platform. We turned our unified comms team into ultimately a Microsoft Fabric and unified comms, just to develop that individual skill set. That all came from the retail days. Succession planning being the biggest thing. Who's going to take over in your absence? Understanding who's got the ability. And you start to give them a bit of responsibility, subtly at first, but getting them to take ownership of something. If somebody takes ownership of something, they will ultimately tend to deliver a better job and a better performance because you're taking ownership and you're delivering it for your own benefit. And ultimately, that all came from the retail days. We had to perform operationally. We had metrics to consider, but a lot of it was around about sales and waste and various other aspects. But if we go back to my days of night shift, I had a team lead that wouldn't hold up on you. You were constantly pushed to improve performance. And I'd learned. The other thing, a good thing with retail, I had various store managers over the years. That not one store manager would come into that environment and say everything the previous guy done was great and let's just keep doing the same. They all had their own ideas. So as a manager, you had to adopt to the new management coming in and then adjust and support that style. And you might not have agreed with all of it. You would have your feedback, but ultimately you're there to do a job and you would get on with it. But the one thing it gave me was the insight that every manager is different, and that helped me develop my manager skill set to what I wanted it to be. Not necessarily that was a good manager and I'll just do things the exact same as him. Every manager, even the bad ones and the ones that were you felt you weren't getting as much from, you still had the ability to balance your own management style. So that ultimately, I think that took in there. Technology at the time, I was always one. When I left retail, I was actually running, and Tesco's had this Tesco tech support. It was a sales department, it was an electrical department, but they rebranded it as a tech support department. It was really about advising customers on the best electronics to buy. It was encouraging sort of use of finance agreements and various other. It was very sales based, but ultimately, I had the ability and the technical ability to learn very quickly of various aspects of technology, and that then helped me deliver in that role. But I then took from that role with a customer service skill set and moved into workplace region eventually.
Can I just jump in? What was the moment that you realised then that retail wasn't going to give you the kind of long-term future that you wanted? What was the
flexibility and I had 3 young kids. My kids now, they're 22, 18 and 17, but at the time they were young. I had two under twos basically. Really hard to be flexible in retail, being in and you had to be at site all the time. There was no flexibility around that. obviously, so it's not something you could do remotely. I had a bit more flexibility in technology that I could work remotely as required. I had the ability to jump on and catch up in my time, maybe when the kids had an appointment. It wouldn't stop me delivering my role. I could still jump on after that appointment. I didn't have to wait an hour to get to the office and various other bits like that. The flexibility of technology versus retail, that kind of pulled me straight away. The passion I had for getting things fixed, really a dog with a bone sometimes, but that goes against you in a first line environment because you can spend too long on a call with a customer. So I then had the sort of ability of balancing that up with moving it to second line, etc. But I had that passion. And even as a first line analyst with EY many years ago, and Getronics, I worked for a third party. That was my initial sort of step into that space. But I would be sort of badgering the second line or following a ticket, if you like. One of the biggest advice I'd give to our service desk with my last dog was tag yourself in a ServiceNow ticket and you see it through to conclusion. You might not deal with it and close it out, but for your benefit as a first line analyst, you've learned something else then.
You made the decision to return to education later in life. What was that experience like?
I always say the sort of day one when you're sat in a classroom with, I'll say school kids. They'd left school and this was an HNC degree, so it was literally straight out of school and in there. I'm the one sat at the front, in front of the lecturer, trying to listen to the guy. I'm the one that stepped down from the management career, taken the salary decrease, made all the commitments to go and do that in college full time. I'm the one telling the youngsters to be quiet while I'm listening to this guy. You brought a sense of life skills with you, and I suppose the sort of older, wiser, that sort of mentality. The HNC, I sat the first few weeks, it was like out of my comfort zone. I was sitting and listening to binary sums and equations, and I was sitting there not getting it. But the moment you do, it suddenly get the light bulb and you get it, and it all makes it worthwhile. It was definitely, I never regretted it, and I never was. I never looked back, if I'm honest. There was a few days in the first sort of month or so where I thought, oof. But one of the things I did.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say that, like balancing studying, family life, finances, with self-doubt and stuff, all that. Like, how did it kind of go for you, you know?
It's hard. One of the things I'd done when I left retail, and I've done it in every job if I've moved roles, and I even done it before I left retail, I left on the terms that I knew enough I could go back if it didn't work. I didn't leave on bad terms. I left it fully in a position that I can fall back on this skill set. So much so that I'm nearly considering it at the moment in my current situation. And I've had the sort of conversations with people to say, do you want to come back to retail management? And I'm like, ooh, I'm not there yet. But I always left it in such a position that if it didn't work out, I could grow. I have such a drive for achievement for myself. I kind of knew that I wouldn't require it. But yeah, definitely the balance with life. It was actually easier working. I started off still doing part-time hours while I was doing my HNC. When I got to my HND, it was a bit more involved. I needed a bit more. I kind of toned that down to part-time, 1 day a week or once a weekend. And then ultimately towards the end of my HND, I turned it off. I had the ability. My wife was at that point working again, so I'd spent 5 years while she was at uni supporting. The roles had flipped, and I was able to concentrate fully on my HND. And then when I went to university, I stepped into a third year degree. Where having done the HNC and HND, and I'd done a degree in computer networking, that was me in my element, because by the time we got to that point, it was all on you. And I thrived on that. There's your coursework, there's the subject, we'll do a lecture on that day, we'll do a lab on that day, but ultimately there's your time scale that you need to get things done by. That was me in my element. Plan myself out, get that done, get this done. And even at uni, my sort of leadership skills came into their own. There's one module in my degree, I fear noise to signal ratios and various algorithms to working out traffic down a line with internet signals and network signals. It was very much maths based. It was very much algebra. Now, I'd come out with a scraped a pass at O level at maths many years before. I failed the exam, not miserably, just failed the exam, and I was in a panic thinking I'm going to have to go and do a resit now for this exam. What saved me in the module was we had a level of coursework and group leadership, group work. Now, my peer scores actually bumped it up, and I managed to pass a module through that. So although I'd just failed the exam, it was in leadership skills and directing the team, because we had a group piece of work and you worked with 3 or 4 individuals. You were then taking their strong aspects of what they knew well, just as you would do in real life, to help you deliver this as a teamwork thing. And the feedback then helped me drive over that.
So you talk about age becoming an advantage rather than a disadvantage. What do you mean by that?
Experience, life skills. When I left university, there was lots of young people, shall we say, that thought that was it, they're sorted, they've got their computer degree, they're going to step into 50, 60 grand a year jobs, easy. I knew it wasn't going to be as easy as that, with a bit of life skills, nothing on my CV physically for working in that environment. And I would say to them, you need to really get something on your CV, and the older, wiser person, just helping direct them a little, and that maturity comes through. I knew that I got into contracting for 3 months initially, just to get some experience on the CV. I then went to EY as a contractor for a year, more experience on the CV. It was a year and a half in before I got a first permanent role in my last organisation. That lasted 13 years in the end through progression. But I knew having the life skills and the maturity to say, and I do this with my kids now. I've got one daughter just finishing university. I've got one, she's not doing college, she just finished college, she started working in retail, strangely enough. And my son, who's just leaving school and going to university. And I talk to them all the time about this. You're not going to go and get a degree and go into a role. You might go on a graduate program and then you build that experience up, and that's that sort of physical side up.
Yeah.
So I think the older and wiser, I've said the more mature student, they help stabilise some of the team. In HNC, there was very much a mindset, we're doing computers and this is dead easy. They won't put the work in. They'd literally stepped from leaving school into a course that they thought was right. We had a lot of natural attrition through that. There was lots of people dropped out. As we filtered through that HNC year, the ones that were really interested in it hung around and were doing well.
I mean, what kind of mindset did you take into your first Helpdesk role then? You mentioned there. What kind of mindset did you take in from retail?
Into my first service desk role.
Into your first service desk role,
after university.
Yeah.
So I was doing exams. I finished my exams at uni, knowing that I wasn't really moving forward with anything. I had no experience on my CV. I got a role with a third-party vendor in Glasgow. Now, I went for an interview with this guy, and he's seen something in me that could develop into something. Now, first line, you think that's the first line role. It's actually, in technical terms, it's very hard because it's fast-paced. And you've got the ability to turn over calls quickly, first time fix, and all them pressures. So he put me onto a security help desk, which required us to contact the user rather than the user phoning in. Now, that was perfect for my sort of new into that space. And he's seen something, it was a 3-month contract, then extended for 3 months. But I took from the retail the customer service skills from that, because I'm calling users, I'm talking to users, I'm empathizing with them. Sometimes frustrated users on the end of a phone. In retail, you face frustrated customers. I brought a lot of that skill set already built into me from years in retail and being able to understand that. The interesting thing with third party is it's slightly different to in-house in the fact of we were charging customers for that service. There was certain things within the contract we couldn't do. Because one, we're protecting our sort of investment as a third party, and simple things you don't think about, like calling customers all the time. That's a cost to you for making phone calls. We wait for the customers to log the ticket, and then we get them to contact, and we talk our means. So the retail side, customer service, the biggest aspect. When I was doing my technical days, that was the biggest aspect. And I talk very much at interviews now about that customer service mindset. I worked for an organisation that our IT was internal in-house, but every one of our customers was our users, regardless of it being in-house. We still treated them like a customer, because ultimately they are. Because if they weren't making the money for the company, we wouldn't be getting paid. We were a support service. So that's our customer. And I've always had that customer mindset through all the roles I've had. Whether that's internal or third party, it's irrelevant. Your end user is your customer. When I work with a business in my sort of regional roles, the stakeholders are the key business users in the business. I would go into directors' offices and have honest conversations. Sometimes you'd find out there's issues in an office from the senior guy because everybody's had a gripe to him about it, but nobody's raised a ticket. So you take that information, you go and investigate it a bit, and suddenly you're turning that into proactive work and delivering fixes that would never arose because they didn't use the system. It was a niggle, it was a pain point, but it wasn't an ultimate service killer.
Let's look now at the climb then, Gerry. You've gone from retail, you've done some further education, got your degree, and you've landed these initial contract roles. So let's look at the climb.
So I went from 3 contracts initially, 3 months, another 3 months, went into a 6-month contract at a company in Glasgow. And then the opportunity came up. I actually had a friend work for my old organisation. He'd seen a role for an IT technician job in Glasgow. Spoke to me about it, sent me a short job description. Yeah, looks like a perfect stepping stone for me. And this was $1 my old organisation. And I applied for it. And I'd done contracting for about a year and a half at that point. I'd worked with guys that had been doing contract for 10 years. I like the security aspect of having a permanent role. I like the holidays, the security, and knowing that I was getting paid every month and I wasn't having to worry about tax and all that sort of stuff. And I'd always worked, I'd never worked contract roles in my retail days. It had always been permanent roles. That drove me towards it initially. Plus, it was very much hands-on in the office, something I really wanted to get to grips with. Point desktop, second, third line type roles within that office you build your users. I applied for that, successfully got it, and I worked my way through that with the mindset that I'd always had, the hard work ethic. Why do something tomorrow that you can do today? We stepped in there and went and dealt with things. We'd done a lot of adoption and education. We'd taken over as a shared information service at the time. There was very much still a mindset with users about tapping the IT guy on the shoulder and saying, I need this fixed, I need that fixed. We're working really closely with the business leaders to develop that communication down. Let's get a ticket raised, let's get it on the system. Information to users, this is why we're doing this. So we're not going to forget about your ticket, we're not going to forget about you. If you tap me on the shoulder, I'm walking through, I've gone to another job, I've come back, I've forgotten all about it. And it's just changing that mindset of the business into using the IT support.
How did you accelerate your progression from that role when others around you were maybe moving a bit more slowly?
Probably my own drive for achievement, if I'm honest, my tenacity. I'd always been a believer in don't sit and wait for a role to be delivered to you. Somebody in my retail days, nobody's going to come along and hand you the 40, 50 grand a year job. You're going to have to go and knock on the door for it, or you're going to have to go and ask. I always brought that tenacity and drive for achievement with me. So I was looking at other opportunities around the organisation at the time. This is where I want to head. And I'd fully said when I came to technical, I've done my days as a manager. I'm going to go down a technical route now. Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but fortunately for me in my own development, the opportunities came up. Now, I'm not one for holding back that opportunity. I'll go knock on the door. I might not get there the first time, but I've had the experience. So my boss's role at the time as regional workplace, who was in charge of all the technicians around north of England and Ireland, he had left and his job came up, and I thought, I'm going to go and ask for that. I've got some experience from retail. I've got the managing teams and managing people. I applied for it. I was interviewed for it. Didn't get it. Didn't take any broken hearts from that. I simply took that experience and went, that's fine. I know what I'm looking for. Should it come up again? 5 or 6 years, 3 or 4 years later, it came up again. I applied for it and got it. And I used to say to my team, if you're interested in progressing somewhere, talk to me about it. Tell me. At the end of the day, nobody will hand it over to you. Nobody will say, oh, this is a really good guy, and we think he could do that, if he's not asked the question in the first place. So I said, yeah, I've got a T-shirt. I'm not doing management again. The opportunity came up for management. I stepped in it. I went and pushed it. Didn't get there. Second time I pushed it, and I got there. And the skill sets come back to you. You never lose that. From working all them years in retail, the mindset and the operational side and the various aspects, metrics and things like that. Yes, it was a different environment, but I'd worked my way up through that, understanding what our leaders were looking for. So I'd sort of built an understanding myself of what that looked like.
At what point then did you stop thinking like a technician and then kind of start thinking like a leader again?
It never goes away.
No.
You have to. You can't lead by show and tell and hands on. As I said earlier on, one of the famous comments from one of my team when I turned up at a site and I'm elbowing him out of the way to get into the server room to start stripping cables out. He said, let us do the job because you're there to manage it. The technical side, it's always, if you're in technical, it's always of an interest. I took over a team in my last organisation. Now I moved from workplace into regional workplace and then technicians on site into an application-based team. We were rolling out an ERP system. I picked up a team of 4. I had no knowledge in that area. One of the reasons I pushed myself towards that area was to aid me stepping back a bit. I was starting to grow my skill set and I wanted to not have the technical ability to just go and do it. And I was nowhere near a micromanager, but it's very much, in my old role, I used to be the technician, then I was the boss, and I still knew all the stuff that was needing done. And the temptation to take over and do it, just do it yourself. You have to let your teams progress and let them learn. So I took over in applications for that reason. But I still kept my head in the door. I was still watching first line tickets. I was working with one of my technicians. I was trying to triage a ticket in my head for my own benefit. And then I would ask my technician, well, I think it's X, Y, and Z. And she would say, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So I was still learning, but you still have a technical love, if you like, and the love of the technical side and understanding something. And more importantly, as you're strategic, it then helps you look and say, well, what's the root cause? Could we then mitigate that? Could we put something in to prevent that happening again? Whereas a technician might fix it, leave it, and that's it done. I had the ability to then think forward from that. How can we improve that going forward? How do we prevent it? How do we turn it into a proactive piece of work instead of a reactive piece of work? So I never really put the tool set down.
What does managing technology services for more than 20,000 users actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
The interesting thing, in that size of environment, you're not managing all of technology. As that level I was at, the IT manager, I had the area of responsibility around Microsoft before that, around ERP. You have infrastructure guys and you have other colleagues. So but obviously the bigger the scale, the more wide range, and it was split into small sectors to help you manage that. But ultimately, one service to 20,000 users, if it went wrong, the impact was huge. ERP system being especially. We would be involved with MIs if it was a performance issue or various other aspects. It feels, you break it down, there's a level of, we used to step into an MI and would have business users shouting at us and we need something done. You see, we're doing that. Technical people come into this core, I've got a level coming in from there. Sometimes the business say, whose fault is it? And they're wanting to look for a reason straight away. And I say, I don't really care whose fault it is at the moment. My urgency at the moment is to get it back up and running. We will worry about that later. We will investigate later what root cause is and what could be done to potentially prevent it happening again. Where sometimes the business side would just jump on and say, who done that? Why did this happen?
Go.
You know, I mean, we're not back up and running yet. Let's get the service up and running. Let's get you comfortable. We will follow that through with problem management, for example. So in that size of organisation, I suppose it's a scale. It can be overwhelming.
What are the biggest challenges then of operating at that level and scale? What was the hardest things that you come across?
You're not going to... Users and the business all have different ideas. So the bigger that scale is, the harder it is to keep everybody happy. And there's a lot more adoption work, education work, things like that. And the scale itself, it's understanding the mindset, the budget side, it can be huge. But the slightest change on something can impact. It's understanding the impacts. The bigger the scale, the slightest change can cause a bigger impact, whether that be a budget on time or service availability or what have you. So it's understanding that if you can think through to impacts. What I used to say to a lot of my team was, they would come, loads of people make assumptions. So even your internal teams, your own teams, they start to make assumptions. So you've had an issue with a system and something happens again. The assumption is it's the same as last time. I say, stop. Are you sure it's the same as last time? Give me facts. As an IT manager, I will make decisions based on informed information. But don't come with assumptions. And the business were guilty of making it. We'll just assume that's happened before, it's the same as last time. We don't know that yet. Let's confirm it. Let's deal with facts. We've had situations where something's gone wrong in one system. The same system has gone wrong again a week later. So by coincidence, it's the same day, and then the assumptions are made. And when you dig into it and go, actually, there was a change the night before, I think that's maybe impacted it. So let's investigate what the change was. Can we roll it back? So the assumptions part as well. In that size, your assumptions you can be off down a rabbit hole. And 3 or 4 hours later, having no service, you haven't come up with anything because you've made the assumption and gone down that route. So it's having the level-headedness to then pause. Let's go and do that test maybe. That will confirm that fact it's the same issue. And I think the hardest thing for the size of it is that impact. If you don't get that right, then the impact is a lot bigger. And there's quite a lot of pressure as an MI manager managing a major service in that size of organisation. If it's on the ERP or finance or various aspects of that, the impact is revenue. And that can be huge.
How do you balance innovation with governance, security and compliance?
Governance is key. This is something I talked to various people about in the last few months about Copilot. Copilot, as we discussed at the start of this call, Copilot is a great thing. AI, I think, should be encouraged and grasped, but providing you have control. Now, governance and security side, what I've found in other organisations with Copilot, I alluded to this earlier on, we bring Copilot in and we adopt it and we enable it, and suddenly it's finding information in our systems that maybe shouldn't be found by particular user-sensitive information. And when you dig into it a little, it's actually not Copilot, it's the issue. Your data governance isn't right. You're oversharing as an organisation, but you're sharing documents that should just be limited to the individuals in the organisation. Now, it's very easy in the Microsoft environment to share with all org, unless you turn it off centrally. One of the things I've done in previous organisation, we've turned off share of external, a blanket rule across the organisation. There's no real reason to share these documents via SharePoint with external. Sometimes a user will sit and say, I need to share this with 10 people. It might be a bit sensitive. I'm just going to share it with all org. Now, Copilot raises that to the surface very quickly because there might be keywords within that a user's looking for, and it's a lot better than users or search engines that will just dig it out and say, there's a document, say a passport or something. And that rings alarm bells suddenly. How can that user see that? Oh, Copilot's seen too much. No, the document was shared wrong in the first place. So the governance is key to get that mindset right. The tools you can start to put in to prevent that are things in Purview where you can say, I'm going to put a label on this document. Force a user to think about it first. What classification is this to the company? Is it sensitive? Is it public facing? Is it this? Now, based on them labels, you can then force that sharing policy to say only share with an individual user. And if you have to put 10 email addresses in because it's 10 people, you're physically putting them in there.
That can be really complicated as well. See, if a company's putting AI in and they implement it onto a data or onto files that are already there, they've all been marked with certain parameters or sensitivity in terms of confidentiality. And then if they don't go through everything again and check it's all at the right level and stuff before they put AI on top of the data, then it's going to be
almost a project within itself to sort your data out before you implement AI. It's very much, and it's something I've been looking at, less from an enterprise. Obviously, I've had to deal with an enterprise level. I've been looking recently, I've had the time to go and investigate and research things about how that works in a small to medium enterprise. Because sometimes the controls have maybe not in there already or not been in there, or they think they're doing something. A lot of small companies maybe move from on-prem to cloud and they haven't thought about data policy on the way through. SharePoint, if I think about SharePoint versus some of the old document systems we used to use, that used to show all unless excluded, whereas SharePoint excludes until you allow all. So you do have that level comes in that if you default into there, it's not going to be a straight away, then you have to review it and go back and set them permissions. Whereas some of the older systems, I'm thinking of OpenText in particular, used to just share all unless you put permissions in, you put the reverse policy and have denied to certain parts of the organisation.
What was the thing that Microsoft recently done? Was it a couple of months ago or something that they auto-enabled, and it was like you didn't go and turn it off, all your documents were going to go into Copilot or something like that, or there was something weird.
Microsoft are known for doing 50-50 testing, and if nobody shouts about it, they'll just enable it.
Terrible, isn't it?
Quite a few times.
Yeah.
It's one, and we used to work as part of Microsoft's.
I've got a question around that. Sorry. So you've managed large Microsoft licensing estates. Where do organisations waste the most money?
Oof, now you ask that question. I don't know if it's a waste. It's just whether it's been optimised. I think, from my perspective, in the last large organisation, I was looking at Things like the unified support. We were getting it from Microsoft at a certain price because we had such a big agreement with them and everything else. That reduced the price of unified support. I would challenge quality of it. Microsoft would take it out to a third party. Ultimately, in the last couple of years, moved a lot of that unified support out to third parties. You could potentially go and get a better deal for your own third party. We still have the frustration of Microsoft support because a third party would be managing that, but then it wouldn't be me as a manager, my team as individuals managing that, which makes them more productive. It would be the third party we were paying a bit less for. Things like that, and looking at optimizing that. SharePoint storage, massive area that we used to have ongoing battle with. Now, with certain organisations, there's a retention policy. You'd have to keep data for so long if you're working on projects, legal holds and everything else. Now, SharePoint storage can just run away with you. You just keep, in typical Microsoft fashion, you can add as much as you like, but you can't take it away to your annual review. So you have to manage that, and you have to try and predict what is that going to look like. We were then looking at things like archiving off after a certain amount of time. If a project's not being used, SharePoint Advanced features, for example, will give you metrics that says last time a data file was opened or accessed or various other bits. We were looking where our developers have said, right, how can we take that as gospel and not assumption and archive that off into a cheaper blob, if you like, short storage blob. So there's a lot of potential waste and a potential optimization within SharePoint storage. The other big aspect of Microsoft is consumption-based charging, where if you don't put controls into consumption-based charging, it can run away with you because you're not paying for a fixed amount, you're paying either pay-as-you-go for some of the fabric space. Azure's got a massive amount of consumption charging. I was starting to work with our hosting manager to look at what that was involving and how potentially we could utilize it and optimize it down. Fabric coming out as a company of engineers who like to do their own things and use a Power Platform and automate a lot of stuff, and we were trying to automate a lot as well as IT. If you don't control that early days, you could be off down a rabbit hole of consumption charging, which you have no control over and really hard to forecast. With all the dashboards in the world, but really hard to maintain control. Sometimes it was right, you used a pay-as-you-go model, an application that was developed for a user and they only used it once when they came in the building, maybe an induction application. Now, there's no point in paying a set charge for that, so you pay for that app every month for every user. You just pay it as a pay-as-you-go, so a new person coming in would use it, and you would have that pay-as-you-go charging. So another consumption charge in another area, large area, to understand what it looks like just now, understand what it can look like in a year to 2 years to 3 years even.
You've touched on Copilot a couple of times, so maybe we can find out what's the reality versus the hype. What foundations should organisations have in place before they start scaling AI solutions?
Governance, for one, data governance especially. AI solutions, I don't think there's something to be scared of. I think you should be grasping it. It shouldn't be reliant on, I use Copilot, or not Copilot, but ChatGPT, AI, shall we say, is a more generic term, a lot for a starting base. If I'm looking at a job description, for example, I will analyse it via ChatGPT and say, give me a view knowing what you know about me and where that fits in. I wouldn't use it and say, write me a CV for that role and then copy and paste it straight in without reviewing it. It's a starting point. It should always be reviewed. And even in Copilot, the obligatory message when you do a meeting room recap always says this was generated by Copilot and should be reviewed before sharing, because it might not pick up some of that stuff, or it'll be in the wrong context, or various other things. So adoption and user training. We very much started as a sort of 200 to 300 pilot initially, and then everybody wants it because everybody wants the new tools. But we would also put a metrics in that says if you've used it and you don't use it within 30 days, we'll pull back the licenses. Because ultimately, everybody that wants it would maybe use it once or twice. If they didn't like it, suddenly you're paying a premium license for their account, they're never using it. So we would then put in the governance side or the tools and the controls to say if you don't use it in a certain days, pull it back. Please request it again if you're going to use it again. But ultimately, you wanted to. Microsoft would love you just to say there's 20,000 users. Moving to E7 is no coincidence, in my view, about what Microsoft are doing with Copilot, because it was the same when we went from E3 to E5. They're very much
So
trying to
you have a phrase that AI without governance is just expensive risks.
Yes.
Is that what you mean in practice about that?
Yeah, that's what I've seen in practice, and that's certainly what I've seen in a lot of what I'm looking at the moment for small to medium enterprise. Obviously, would you say it's lower risk for small to medium enterprise? The impact might be smaller, but the risk is the same. If it is sensitive information, GDPR requirements, etc., that's the same risk for any organisation, whether you've got 300 or 3,000 or 30,000. But I think you still get the same fines if you get it wrong. And understanding user education, understanding a user understanding what their commitment should be to security. I talked to an organisation recently, and they said to me, "How would we roll this out?" Because we would bring Copilot in, but we want to get security tools in. How would we refresh security with our users? So, as your induction process, everybody gets it on the way in the door. Mandatory training, they must do security. You do it at a training plan. Security, your responsibility, for example. What about the 400, 500 people we've still got? You must put a training package in to say, let's go and refresh this with all users. Exercises, simulation exercises.
But what McDonald did, and there was like 20,000 users there, and I think you mentioned you spent time automating joiner, mover, and lever processes. Why do you think that's so important?
That's not easy.
Why do you think that's so important for a company or any company doing that, really?
Yeah, it's optimization. I would be looking from the Microsoft perspective, how many E5 licenses am I not utilizing at the moment? That was costing them money. Because ultimately I can turn down E5, I can turn up E5s as much as I like. You can truck as much as you want to over the year, but your only time to bring it down is true down once a year before your agreement renewal. So I'd be looking and saying, hey, HR, what's our forecast plans for users coming in this year? Now, if we're not going to get it 100% accurate because things can change very quickly. But ultimately, if I'm sitting with an extra 1,000 license, that's costing me that per user every month, and nobody's using it. So you trim that down and then add small and little and often. Now, you might get things like interns coming in short term. Now, they're going to need a license. You can't take that license off straight away. Okay, let's use the intern licenses for graduates when they come. They're going to be in. Let's not just throw another couple hundred licenses for the graduates. Let's wait for the interns and get the processes, because in some organisations, you sit 3 or 4 months before you would disable accounts. Let's disable them, hold the data and retain them. Should they come back in a few months, we can get away with that. But the license, let's take it off and utilise it elsewhere. There's a potential saving there to be had every month, just by being a bit more coy with E5 licensing, or E7 or whatever when you're on. Do all users need a Power Platform Premium license, Power BI Premium? A lot of users will just use a reader and open it up. So yeah, there's optimization to be had with that. And the bigger organization, I suppose you could argue the bigger you can save. But to me, it's about the risk and the balance. And the risk, ultimately, depending on what it is, can be the same for a massive organization or a small one.
If you could automate one process in every organization tomorrow, what would it be and why?
Oof. Now you ask me a question. The starters and leavers process, everybody claims is automated. It's always a bit of a hole. That probably is one that if you can optimize your starters and leavers processes. To a degree, it's automated anyway, I think. But there's risks with it, and it's always one that doesn't quite get it right all the time. I think having that automated system, I think the complication comes into integrations with other systems. It's like name change in an organization. If somebody wants a name change to something else, you've suddenly got a conflict in various parts of the system. Now, if you get a user to go in and if you could automate something that says a user wants to be called Gerry instead of Gerald, my example, get it right at HR and induction and onboarding, because that's important going forward. But if you could step in your own system and say, I'm going to change my name to that, never seen that anywhere because it's too much risk. You suddenly get a conflict on the account, etc. Email changes, yeah, you can add an alias to an email. But if somebody wants to physically change that over to that side, I think it's something every company strives to have, is an automated onboarding and offboarding. It obviously relies on integrations with people systems, with HR systems, with your sort of environment, and whether that's AD hybrid or cloud fully in Office. I think that. Carry on now.
No, I was just going to say, there was this stage that your story's taken us from retail shop floor to lead an enterprise technology strategy. If someone's listening today and kind of wondering whether it's too late to reinvent themselves, what would you say to them?
Don't be. It's something that I think I said before. Nobody will take you by the hand and take you there. You need to drive towards it. Always keep it open-minded. Stepping into colleges with a bunch of 17-year-olds without being ageist towards 17-year-olds, but stepping in with a bunch of kids that had just left school, it's the fear of the unknown. It's like going for a role just now. If you don't know the company and the system, and there's always you're out of your comfort zone until you start to understand that. But nobody will take you by the hand. I say this to my kids quite a lot. Nobody will take you by the hand and say, "There's a 50 grand a year job. Go do that." If you've got to drive yourself towards that goal, and you shouldn't be scared. Leave it in a place you would like to go back to is another key point in that. Just because you're leaving an employer or a totally different sector, don't leave on bad terms. Don't go in and, from an IT perspective, mess with the systems before you leave. You never know when you need to fall back on that. So much, as I said today, about potentially looking at go back to retail. I'm trying to avoid it like the plague, but I'm not knocking it because ultimately it would maybe be a role in the short term for me and stabilise things and allow me to do that. But never leave it in them. You leave on bad terms and you can never go back. That's you're increasing your own risk. But you shouldn't be scared of it. Back into education, that was probably the biggest step. I left school at 16. I didn't stay on for any hires, didn't do any further education. I went and jumped on going back to 86, showing my age now. But I went on to a YTS scheme and as a chef, £26 a week. Left school at 16, went and done that. At 41, I graduated with a degree at uni. Now, I never thought I could achieve that. I was never academical. I talked to my kids. 2 of them were looking at uni. One's just finished uni. One of them's not academical. She never confesses to me. I see myself in her a lot with the practical hands-on type. I had a lot of help through uni between my wife and others that helped me progress through the academical side because I was never academical. But ultimately, as a graduate at 41, I thought, well, that's an achievement. 3 years. And when I look at my IT career, a lot of people I speak to, I've worked with a lot over the last 10 years or so, and when they know my background, I've only been in IT 12 to 13 years at a time, they don't get it. They're like, no. It's maybe just a sign of what I am and what I've done in the past. But it's been a journey like that, where I wanted it to be quite slow and move towards technical, move towards systems, learn as much technical. As soon as the opportunity for leadership came up, I jumped on it because I had the skill set to bring with it. And even after I jumped on it, I went from technician to a regional manager to increasing that region size to an applications and ERP system manager where we took a team from 4 to 8, doubled it because of a new system coming out, to a team of 23 with 3 team leads. So even the journey in the management, I've constantly looked at develop that to a bigger team. Because as an individual, I'm able then to look at the wider scope and step back. And not step back by, leave a team to do it. You're stepping back so you've got the capacity to take in the wider scope. Yeah. But you should never, any advice to anybody, don't be scared of it. Grab it with both hands. As long as it's like anything else in life. If you've mitigated the risk by ensuring you can go back to that old job if need be, then it's less risk. But the benefits are huge because the benefits of working your way through that industry.
It's been a real pleasure, and you mentioned the journey, and on behalf of Michael and myself and Phair podcast, we'd like to thank you for sharing that journey, the insights and the lessons learned. Really appreciate it.